All right, strap yourselves in, everyone, because we are about to deep dive into a real mind-bender, Kurt Vonnegut's Slaughterhouse-Five.
Oh, yeah, this one is a doozy.
It really is. We're talking time travel aliens, war trauma, black humor, all wrapped up in this fragmented narrative that really makes you work for it.
Yeah, you can definitely say that again. It's a story that almost defies telling. Even Vonnegut himself said about the Dresden bombing, which he lived through. It is so short and jumbled and jangled because there is nothing intelligent to say about a massacre.
And that's just it, right? How do you tell a story about something so horrific that it breaks language itself? And yet, Vonnegut did it. He gave us Slaughterhouse-Five, this incredibly powerful anti-war novel that forces us to confront the absurdity of it all.
And he does it by throwing us right into the deep end with Billy Pilgrim, this optometrist who becomes unstuck in time after his war experiences.
An optometrist, that's interesting, right? Someone who's
Yeah.
supposed to help people see clearly, and yet Billy's own vision of time and reality is completely shattered.
Yeah, it's like his mind is trying to protect him from the full weight of those memories, especially the trauma of Dresden.
Because Dresden isn't just a setting in this book, is it? It's like this specter that looms over everything that haunts both Billy and Vonnegut himself.
Totally agree. And I think you can see Vonnegut's own struggle to process that event reflected in Billy's detached, almost passive way of being in the world.
Right. You know what I mean? That so it goes, he says, after every mention of death.
Chilling, right.
Right.
Especially when he uses it in response to his wife's death.
And
It's just so matter of fact. It's like he's numb to the pain of it all.
makes you wonder if that's his way of coping with the trauma. Maybe he has to shut down those emotions just to function?
Could be, but then there's also the influence of the Tralfamadorians, these
Yeah.
aliens who show up and tell Billy that all moments in time exist simultaneously.
Yeah, the Tralfamadorians, they're like the ultimate embodiment of so it goes.
Yeah.
Their whole philosophy is that everything that's ever going to happen has already happened. No point in trying to change anything.
Right. It's this really deterministic view of the universe that kind of takes away free will completely. It's pretty heavy stuff.
Heavy is an understatement. And it makes you question, right, is Vonnegut actually endorsing this view? Or is he just presenting it as one way of understanding the universe, one that might even be appealing to someone like Billy, who's been so traumatized by war? Well,
Exactly. And I think that's what makes Slaughterhouse-Five so thought-provoking. It doesn't give you easy answers. It throws these big existential questions right back at you and forces you to grapple with them.
yeah, we're left with more questions than answers.
Yeah.
So we've got this character who's literally unstuck in time, a traumatic event that haunts the narrative and aliens with this really wild perspective on life and death.
A recipe for a wild ride, you could say. Where do we even go from here?
Well, I think next we got to dig into the themes that emerge from this chaotic landscape, like how Vonnegut uses all these elements to talk about war, the fragility of human life, the search for meaning in a world that often seems to lack it.
Definitely lots to unpack. Let's get into it. One of the things that always gets me about Slaughterhouse-Five is how Vonnegut can make you laugh in the middle of all this darkness and trauma.
Yeah, it's definitely not your typical comedy, though,
Yeah,
right? It's more like this dark, almost absurd humor.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that's so important to understanding what Vonnegut's doing here. It's not that he's making light of war or anything like that.
No, not at all. But he's not letting the darkness completely take over either.
Yeah,
It's like he's finding these little moments of absurdity within the tragedy.
I think that's a great way to put it. Like, remember that scene where Billy and the other prisoners are trapped in that underground meat locker during the Dresden bombing?
Oh yeah, they're just sitting there surrounded by dead animals while the whole city is burning above them.
It's such a bizarre image, but it also makes you think, right? Like, even in the middle of all this chaos and destruction, humans still try to find some kind of normalcy.
Some semblance of order in the middle of the apocalypse.
Exactly. And then there's Billy's recurring dream of being a giraffe among other giraffes.
Talk about surreal, right? It's like this total escape from reality.
Maybe, but it also makes you think about the Tralfamadorians and their whole perspective on time. Maybe all realities are equally valid in their eyes.
Whoa, okay, yeah, that gets pretty deep pretty fast.
It does, right? And that's what's so cool about Slaughterhouse-Five. It makes you question everything you thought you knew about reality.
It's like Vonnegut saying, hey, maybe there's more than one way to see the world, and maybe those other ways of seeing things can actually help us deal with the tough stuff.
I love that. And speaking of different ways of seeing the world, let's talk about Kilgore Trout, the science fiction author that Billy becomes obsessed with.
Oh yeah, Kilgore Trout, he's like Vonnegut's inside joke, right? This totally obscure author whose books are full of these bizarre and often nonsensical stories.
And yet Billy finds so much meaning in them. It's like those stories give him a way to understand his own experiences.
Yeah, it's like they provide this framework for making sense of the chaos of war, which makes sense given what we were just talking about with the Tralfamadorians.
Right. It's all connected. It's like those stories offer a different way of looking at reality, one that might be more palatable for someone like Billy, who's been through so much.
And it's not just Billy, right? Remember Elliot Rosewater, the guy who inherits all that money and checks himself into a mental ward? He gets hooked on Kilgore Trout, too.
Totally. It's like Vonnegut showing us this universal human need to find meaning in stories, to connect with narratives that resonate with our own experiences.
Especially when those experiences are really tough to process, like war trauma.
Exactly. And it's worth noting that Vonnegut himself is doing the same thing, right? He's using storytelling to grapple with his own wartime experiences.
He's not just recounting events, he's shaping them, filtering them through this lens of dark humor and science fiction.
And that's how he creates this really powerful and thought-provoking work of art, one that continues to resonate with people decades later.
It's a testament to the power of storytelling, right? Even the most horrific experiences can be transformed into something meaningful through art.
Absolutely. And it reminds us that even in the darkest of times, there's still room for humor, absurdity, and maybe even hope.
But let's be real here. Vonnegut doesn't sugarcoat things either, right? He shows us the brutal realities of war, too.
Oh, definitely. He doesn't let us forget the human cost of conflict.
That part where he talks about the German corporal who steals a pair of golden boots and then sees Adam and Eve reflected in them.
Man, that one stays with you. It's like this juxtaposition of innocence and beauty against the backdrop of war's violence.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of all the dehumanization, there are still these glimmers of humanity.
And those glimmers make the darkness even more heartbreaking.
They do. And I think that's what makes Slaughterhouse-Five so powerful. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truths about war, about humanity, about ourselves.
In a way that's both smart and moving, right? It's a book that sticks with you long after you've finished reading it.
It really does. And honestly, I think you could read it multiple times and still find new layers of meaning.
Oh, for sure. It's a testament to Vonnegut's skill as a writer. He created something that's both complex and accessible, profound and entertaining.
That's a rare combination.
It really is amazing how, even though the story jumps all over the place in time, Slaughterhouse-Five still makes it so clear that war really messes you up no matter when you're experiencing it.
Totally. It's not just the physical wounds, right? It's those deep psychological scars.
Yeah,
War changes the way you see everything, time, reality, even yourself.
for sure. And you see that playing out with Billy Pilgrim, too. I mean,
Yeah.
he puts on this detached front, but he's definitely still grappling with everything that happened to him in the war, like his reaction to his own son, Robert, going off to fight in Vietnam.
Right. It's another one of those so it goes moments, and it's heartbreaking.
Mm.
He's seen so much death, so much suffering that he's almost shut down emotionally. Like he can't let himself feel anything or he'll just break.
It's like he's built up this wall around his heart just to survive. But then there are those times when a little bit of emotion does peek through, like when he insists on finding a place to sleep on that packed train to Dresden.
That's right. It's such a small act of defiance.
Yeah.
But it shows us that there's still a flicker of humanity in him somewhere deep down.
I always found those little moments so interesting. It's like Billy's courage is almost childlike, you know? Like he's not weighed down by all those social rules about how you're supposed to act. He's just doing what he needs to do.
Yeah. It's almost like he's tapped into that Tralfamadorian way of being without even realizing it. Just accepting whatever comes his way, embracing the absurdity of it all.
Which, of course, brings us back to the big question that hangs over this whole book. Is free will just an illusion? Is Billy just a puppet of fate, or is his passivity a result of the trauma he's experienced?
Honestly, I don't think Vonnegut gives us a clear-cut answer, which is part of what makes Slaughterhouse-Five so thought-provoking, right? It's like
Yeah.
he's inviting us to wrestle with those questions alongside Billy, to confront our own beliefs about free will, fate, and what it all means.
Absolutely. And he does it in such a unique way, too, blending science fiction, dark humor, and these starkly realistic depictions of war. It's a wild mix that somehow manages to make you think about these really deep philosophical questions.
It's true. He never lets us forget that these aren't just abstract ideas. They have real consequences in the world. Like when he mentions the Children's Crusade, thousands of kids just marching off to the Holy Land with this blind faith and ending up sold into slavery.
Yeah, that's a powerful example. It shows just how easily innocence and good intentions can be twisted, especially during wartime.
And then there's Dresden itself, this beautiful city with no real strategic value, just completely obliterated in a single night. Just a senseless act of violence that shows the truly indiscriminate nature of war.
It's almost like that story about the German guards celebrating their victory as they march towards Dresden, completely unaware that they're walking to their deaths. It's like this darkly comedic representation of how absurd war really
Yeah,
is.
it is. But even in the midst of all the destruction, Vonnegut still manages to find these moments of strange beauty. Like when Billy and the other prisoners share that bizarre meal with their German captors in that meat locker.
Yeah, they're surrounded by death, but they still manage to connect on a human level. It's a powerful reminder that even in the darkest of times, we still crave those moments of solace and connection.
We need to make sense of the senseless, even if it means finding humor in the face of tragedy. Which brings us back to the power of storytelling, right? Billy's fascination with Kilgore Trout's books, those strange and fantastical stories, it's like he's looking for a way to cope with the horrors he's seen, to find some meaning in a world that feels like it's lost all meaning.
And maybe it's through those stories that he stumbles upon this Tralfamadorian idea that time is an illusion, a concept that's both comforting and unsettling. It's not about finding all the answers, but maybe it's about asking the right questions.
So where does that leave us? What can we take away from this whole wild time-traveling journey through Slaughterhouse-Five?
I think Vonnegut wants us to really examine our own understanding of history, morality, and the impact of war. He asks us to think about the fragility of life, the absurdity of violence, and the power of stories to help us make sense of the world, even when it feels like it's falling apart.
Yeah, he doesn't give us easy answers, but he gives us the tools to grapple with these complex questions, to find our own meaning in a world that often feels pretty meaningless.
Maybe like Billy, we need to find a way to loosen our grip on our own rigid perceptions of time and reality.
To embrace the unknown and the uncertain, and to always keep searching for new perspectives.
It's about staying curious, challenging our assumptions, and never giving up on the search for meaning even when things get tough.
And remembering that even in the face of unimaginable horror, there's still beauty to be found, connections to be made, and stories to be told. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Slaughterhouse-Five. We hope you enjoyed the ride.
We hope it's left you with a lot to think about and maybe even inspired you to revisit Vonnegut's work or check it out for the first time. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.